Hey there, I got a homework help question that was nominally about a text-based menu program that allows you to select items and get a total at the end, like a store cash register type thing. Turns out that the help required was more about planning a program from scratch and knowing what concept to apply for each problem or feature. In this program, we're going to convert data between types, use two different kinds of loops, and catch exceptions. If that sounds like a lot, then you're right, and knowing when to use which tool is a big part of what learning how to program really is. Try to follow along, but the only dumb question is the one you don't ask, so put any requests for clarification in the comments. So, what we'll say for starters is how to make a text menu program. So what you firstly need to define is what your menus are going to look like. I don't want to go into things like what are user stories or how to plan software development like in a project management sense. Let's just think about what our program will look like. So we want to have a menu when we start. So it'll say menu and then have some options. And then the user types an answer. And hits enter usually. And then this will usually run in a loop until the program is over. Maybe it's up to you to really draw this diagram to fit your program. So what we're going to do is a online store. So the first menu that we're going to have is menu 1 from file or typed in. So this option will kind of give us two directions we can go. The file mode and the manual mode. So what will these two modes look like to the user? So file mode should be kind of automatic, right? After you type in a file name. But manual mode should, let's say, loop around. So it'll say 1, show the menu. 2, accept selection. And then this will repeat until we're done. How do we know if we're done? We can either make that an option that you select, or maybe we ask at the beginning, how many items total do you have? I don't think that's a really great choice, but it depends on exactly what your homework assignment says. So if you're doing this for an assignment, meet the requirements you're given, don't be too creative. So now let's flesh out this general idea into an actual plan to write our program. So how do we make a menu-driven program with a couple of different menus and allows our user to make some selections and gives a final result? So what I would expect is every diagram will start with the start. And from here, the program has to start collecting user input, making decisions, stuff like that. So first, we'll always print the main menu. And then we'll accept some selection of file or manual. We could even use that exact text as the menu text. So if they pick file, and if they pick manual, our program is now going down 2 different branches. But we want to make a general plan first to see if there's anything we can reuse between these branches, which is a really great place to select where to put functions or how to break things apart to help your code be reusable, so you're not creating the same behavior multiple times or in multiple places. It makes it hard to maintain, hard to debug. But both of these will require a loop, right? Because we are going to need to take input one at a time, but there's multiple items. So let's make up that loop, which should look like show the menu. And if we show this menu to the user, they can see some options like 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. that they can respond with. Then we will do user input and validation. Input validation is something you'll do all the time when you program stuff. You just have to assume that your user can make mistakes or ignore instructions, and you need to be prepared for your program to ask a question for pick a number 1 through 4, and they might get 5 as an answer. They might get 0 as an answer. They might get -999 or the word apple as an answer. Your program should be prepared for at least some basics of unknown inputs to be handled. Same with the file, but we're not going to show a menu, so we should just ask for a file name. That's got to be validated too. Great. So what will these do now? So we will do a loop until we're done getting items. And for this one, we'll do a loop where we read the file one item at a time. Okay, so once we've read a line of a file, we can process that, and then when we're done, we want to probably show some kind of final result, right? Show everything was done. Hey, these are the same. So we should make the invoice function reusable and indifferent to whether the input was done manually or in a file name. Yo, Editor John here again. In case it's not abundantly clear, I am pulling these requirements straight out of thin air. I'm just making up a program for the sake of programming it. If you had actual requirements like an assignment or someone who wants to use the program, go with that instead. There's a whole other thing to consider, which is what's on the menu. So this would be like the list of items that are available, and I'm just going to go for a general store type theme for the items: boots, cheese, crackers, batteries, I don't know, just some general stuff. It's not too important to me. But what we're going to have to describe these items is an item name, which is the full drawn out name. It's nice for humans to read. Then there's the item code, and this will be short, no spaces. If you've ever seen a receipt that has some kind of abbreviated gibberish for your item, then that's exactly what we'll be making. Then there will be the price, which we will want to know so we can charge someone the appropriate amount. It's a number. And there might even be an item number, but I think these will just be 0, 1, 2, all that stuff. So we're going to need to find a way to tie together all of these data values, change one into the other, use them in different situations, but they all refer to the same item on the menu. Okay, so I think we're ready to get started with some code. Okay, so this is a blank file. I'm going to be coding in Python because I have to have some fun. And first step is to do the basic boilerplate. So what is boilerplate? The first thing we're going to have to do is some stuff that we have to do. In Python, that looks like this. You don't have to do it this way, but it's the way I'm going to do it because I think it looks very tidy. So this is a way to make your program very modular. First thing, we're going to define a function called main. And then if we are being run as a program independently, we're going to immediately call the main function. This is very handy because later on you can import your project as a Python module, and what you'll find is that it doesn't automatically run the menu or expect you to type things in. It just allows you to import the functionality. So this is what I would consider Python boilerplate. It doesn't really do anything for our program, but we do need something like this just to set up the structure that we need. And that'll occur in pretty much every programming language. So now what do we need to do in main? We are going to print a message and ask the user if they want to go to file mode or manual mode. And in case you skipped hello world, this is how you print stuff out. And in case you skipped hello whatever your name is as an example program, this is how you accept user inputs. So let's run our program to make sure we're off to a good start. It says file mode or manual mode, and I will say file, but this doesn't really tell us anything about the input, so let's add another print statement to show what the user chose. Run that again, and if we run this again, we just see what the value of what the user typed in is. So this is good, but it's not great. We need to make decisions in our program off this choice. So I think we need to guide the user to put in a number, and we'll also need to restrict the values. So we're going to tackle input validation first. It's one of the most repeatedly needed things in this program design. So let's make a new function. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What does user validation mean for this program? So how are we going to do input validation? I think we need to capture the user in an infinite loop, explain to them what the choice is, and keep asking them for input with a helpful error message until they give something that's valid. So what we'll do is return the results only if it's a valid result. Otherwise, we will keep asking over and over again for more input. So how will we do that? So let's say choose a number. This will be the name of my function. And what we really need for this is a min and a max, which will be the numbers that the user has to choose between for it to be valid. It has to be a number, and it has to be in that range. So we will say, if it's not a number, then go back to the start. Too small of a number? Back to the start. Too big of a number? Hard to believe it, but right back to the start. Otherwise, once we're through all of those, return the user input. Great, this is something we can work out. Let's take a crack at it. So we've made a function called input number. What does it need to do? First, we need to get that user input. Now, first we need to make sure it's a number. There's a couple of ways we can do this, and if you aren't sure, you can always try it out in the console if your language supports that like Python does. So let's start with the string file, and let's save it in a variable. We can retrieve that value. Now we should also be able to try some of the functions on it that a string has available to it, like isDigit. And that got false. So I think if choice equals 4, isDigit is going to return true. This is a good indicator that we should be able to run the int function on it, which will transform that value from the string 4 to the integer value number 4. And that's what we want to work with. So our first response will be, oh, we forgot the loop. Infinite loop. Those are always dangerous, but we'll come back to why this is possible to escape. So we will say if not choice.isDigit continue. Maybe a little early for loops. It may be just in time for you, but the idea here is continue takes us back to the beginning of whatever loop we are on. So now we know that this number can be turned into an integer. So let's do that. So if value is less than min value, we have to provide that to the function to execute it. Then we're going to continue again. And if value is greater than max value, continue. Otherwise, return true. No, return value. There you go. So whatever they typed in, if it's in the range, we will return it. So let's save this, try to run it. Well, we get the main menu out immediately, which doesn't really tell us what we want to do, but we are now able from the console to test our input number function. So if I say to input a number between 1 and 5, well, now I can type in numbers, but until I give it a value that's in that range, it will keep sending me back through the input loop. This works because I know what to do, but it's not very helpful to our user, so I think all of these options need to explain what the user is expected to do a little better. So let's print at the beginning. And I think I forgot the letter F. There we go. And all of these errors, instead of just repeating the input, we should give a message. All right, let's comment out the call to main and just put a pass there for now. And let's run our program again. So I can again choose input number 1, 5. So if I choose 6, that's too high. 0, that's too low. Apple, that's not a number. 2, that is accepted and it is input. So now I should be able to use this function in many places in our program to have the user select a value between minimum and maximum. So let's change main to use that. So what we should put here is select 1 for file mode or 2 for manual mode. Great. If we're able to run this, I didn't call the right function. Instead of choice input, now we should say value equals input number 1, 2. Let's save and run that. Oh, and I also need to change this to say value. So select 1 for file mode or 2 for manual mode. If I pick 1, it gives back the number 1. But what we really want is to know which one of those they selected. So let's do our first branch here and say if value, I don't need parentheses in Python, if value is equal to 1, call file mode. Manual mode. So now we have two more functions we need to make, which will form the two main options from our menu. Great. So let's get to work on manual mode. I think that's going to be the more interesting one to work on. So let's go back to our flowcharts. Okay, in flowcharts, we decided that the user is going to see the menu. We're going to do user input and validation. And if the user is done, we'll go to the invoice section. So let's show the menu now. And that means it's probably time to work out the list of items in the menu. So I'm going to start with what I think is the most simple way to store those different fields that are required. I'm going to store them outside of the function because I know file mode is going to need the same items. I'll start with the names, and this is our general store, so we'll have AA batteries, hiking boots, American cheese slices, bread, 1 loaf, milk, 1 gallon, and what's something else we can put? Rope. Okay, so these values are in a list. AA batteries, hiking boots, cheese slices, loaf of bread, gallon of milk, and some rope. So what I would like to store these as when we select that item is the codes. And maybe I should limit these to 6 characters. Maybe just 4 even I could probably get away with. Bats. Here's another tip if you're trying to make something visually line up. Those extra spaces are allowed. Okay, so short, no spaces, all lowercase. These are nice abbreviations for the items. Now for the prices, I'll pick, call it like $2.99, $15.50. It's a very affordable set of boots. I don't know if any of those are reasonable or if my shop is going to go under as a result of this, but those are our item prices. So now I see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. So the way we would get all of these values out is by using the same index to get a value out of each list. So if we selected index 0, we would get the full name AA batteries out of item names. We would get the code BATT out of item codes, and the price $2.99 out of item prices. Great, data solved. There's better ways to do it or more fancy ways to do it, but if you're learning, this is a fantastic approach to the problem. So having solved the problem of data storage, now let's approach that menu loop. We're going to show the menu. We're going to do user input and validation. And we need a way to detect when the user is done. So first let's print out the menu. And I think what we'll use for that is another function. All this function will do is show the contents of the menu. So what we should put is, we need to loop over all the items in the menu. So let's do this with the range function. And how far should we run our range for? We could count the items, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a range of 5 would give us a chance to look at every item. But what if we add items later? We really don't want to introduce a bug because the index or count of numbers is wrong. So let's use len and pick item names. So now we'll have a number I. It's going to start at 0 and fill every value of the indexes going through that list. So let's print out the full name, item names I for index I. Let's put a $, item prices I. Something else we're missing is the number. So I think sometimes people find it odd when lists start at 0, so we should start at 1. So let's put the item number I plus 1. Okay, let's try this out. I think I need to disable the menu again. Uh-oh, I left this blank. Okay, let's try that. So we just invented the show menu function. Here's what that looks like. So we have the print statement, which prints out the menu with dashes. Then our loop, which starts at I equals 0, and it finds AA batteries. It also gets the price out accurately. So maybe we could workshop how this looks. Maybe the dot should go on the other side. Maybe it's not necessary. But this is functional. It gives a number that you can press, and you know that you'll get that item. Okay. So one other thing I noticed is that there is additional space on the long prices, an extra digit. So let's format that with :.2f to tell Python that we want 2 decimal places on our numbers. So if we run show menu again, we can see that all of these numbers have 2 decimal places now, which I think looks a little bit nicer, looks more like money. Okay, excellent. I would be happy to use that through the rest of this program. So let's go to manual mode. And again, consulting our diagram, it looks like we're going to show the menu every time until we're done. So let's just start with that, done equals false, and have another loop while not done. Sounds pretty clear in English. As long as we're not done, we're going to show the menu. Something else I think we need to put after the menu is, let's put the option to be done. Let's use a little better answer there. Len item names. Okay, so let's try that new version of show menu to make sure it shows. Because we added 1 to this loop, it's slightly off, so let's try one more time with a +1 on it. Okay, so now we have an option that says done shopping. Great. Now, what should we use for input number? So this number for the minimum would be 1, and for the maximum should be the same as this value, the length of items plus 1. And we know that input validation is going to not let anything come through which isn't a proper answer to that. So what we should put for our escape clause is if value is equal to the maximum value, length of items plus 1, then done is going to equal true now. There's something else missing. I think it's even missing from our flowchart, is, what are we going to do with the value if it's just an item to be purchased? Well, let's add another piece of data. It's a global variable. I think the hate these get is undeserved, especially if you're learning. There are good reasons to avoid them, but we're not going to worry about those right now. So let's put items selected as an empty list. And for, let's see, manual mode, this else means any other value besides quit. Then we will say items selected dot append. And what do we want to append? Not the value, not the number they selected, because we know that they were given a menu that has +1 on it. We want the code. So let's take value -1 and look that up in item codes. So that's going to be item codes brackets value -1. This is safe to do because we know it'll be a valid value between 1 and the length of item names. And if it was the last one, we've already selected something and we won't execute this code. So we will append, and I think we are ready to test out manual mode. At the end, I will print items selected so we can look at the result. So let's run this, and I will pick manual mode. We could use the main menu to select this, but I'm still testing the program one part at a time while we're writing it. So we have our menu. It tells us when we're done. We have our input validation input, and I'm going to select a little bit of everything. Let's get boots. Let's get cheese. Let's get bread, and let's get milk. And I think I'm done. So let's select 7. Okay, so I got these item codes into the global variable item selected. Excellent. We don't need to print that out. We could comment this line out or delete it. And what we need to do now is the invoice. So let's make a new function called doInvoice. And where should we put it? It doesn't really matter, but so some might say that doInvoice would require the item selected as an argument. That's valid, and that would be a great way to avoid using global variables if it really annoys you. But in this case, we will just continue to use the global variable, which will be the same whether we've done manual mode or file mode. Okay, so let's do the invoice next. This is going to look somewhat similar to show menu, I think, which will be print invoice, and for item in items selected, we will print a line that says, well, wait a second. We actually need to get that item code and figure out what the price of that is now, don't we? Let's first find the position in the list of item codes. So if I were to say item codes.index ches, we get the value 2. So as long as that item is present, we can get the index of it with .index. So we'll use I again. Slightly unusual in this context, but it makes good sense. Item codes.index item, because item selected, as we printed out, is codes. So we'll look up the index of it in item codes, and we have I, which we can use to look up the price. So let's put, let's see, item names bracket I, and let's put in square brackets the item code. We could look it up in item codes by that index, but we just received the code as part of the loop, so we can use that this way. And print out item prices I. Don't forget the 2F if you want it to look like money. So that will print out. Let's test it through the main menu, I think. So we'll call main. We'll select. We just have to make sure to use manual mode because file mode's not written yet. We don't need to print that out. We'll use this if statement to go to manual mode. Manual mode will show us the menu and take our input until we select done. Once we've selected done, it'll call do invoice, which will look at the values we've selected and show us all of the items. So 2 for manual mode. I'll just select a couple of items and pick done. So it sure enough has all the data, but I think there's something missing from the invoice part. We need to collect the sum of all of these. So we know the item price. Let's just add that to a new variable called subtotal. This will add up all the prices of the items we've selected. Finally, we'll print out a total, which also needs to be printed like money. And if we wanted to do tax, we could do that too. So I guess I should call this subtotal tax. And what will the tax be? I'll make it a global variable we can change later. And just divide it by 100 here, I think. So that would be subtotal times, already forgot what I named it, tax rate. That also needs $signs, don't they? And the total would be 1 plus the tax rate. Might need help working out that math, but I've done this as a preparation. So let's try this out. So manual mode. Pick some things. And we'll pick done. So it comes out to 1 battery, 1 boots, 1 cheese, and 4 loaves of bread. Comes out to $35 with that much tax. Looks correct to me and looking well formatted. I think what we're now missing is file mode. So what would be extremely helpful at the start of any file-based input is to acquire or create a test file. That looks great. I'll just save this. All right, I saved that in a file called test items. So now let's read from a file. So we can't use our input number value or function because, well, a file name's not a number. So we'll have to do some separate input validation for the file name. So let's get that file name. We'll just let them input any text. We have 2 choices of how to proceed. We can either try to open the file and raise an error when it doesn't work, or we can check if the file exists before we try to open it. I think there's a lot of ways that a file could exist, but we still don't have the ability to open it. So let's just try to open it and return whatever error actually happens, if it does happen. So what we'll say is try file equals open file name, except I think this will give us some good results. So let's try this. Select file mode, file to open. Let's just put in nonsense. So that's a pretty good error, I think. There's a lot of other errors that could happen, but I'm not gonna go into great detail here. We're gonna proceed now, assuming that it'll work. So the way try except helps us in this case is that we're able to put any code that we're not sure if it will work in a try block and take exceptions. In this case, we got a no such file or directory exception. So we were able to display that error to the user just by receiving it as a response to our try block. So if everything occurs normally, the except block will never be used, and I suppose it might be good to give up in the case of the file not existing or some other issue. All right. So what do we want to do? Well, in Python, this is pretty straightforward. Let's just say for line in file. The first thing we're going to notice, and let's just print the line literally, the representation of the line. So if I say 1 and test items, we'll notice that all of our lines come with a new line on the end of them. So we're going to have to do some pre-processing. And we'll say line equals line.strip. And that should take this new line off of the end, which will give us something that will match exactly with our item codes. If this line is in the list of item codes, we can simply append it to the list just like we did on the invoice. Just like we did on manual mode, we don't have to look up an item code, we just already have it from the file. But we do need to make sure that it exists first, right? So what we should say is, if not item code, no, if not line in item codes. So line in item codes would mean that the line is a word like bat, boot, ches, milk, rope, etc. These lines can occur as item codes and directly refer to an item. But if it's not there, then we should probably print something out, item not found, and give the code that failed. But besides that, I think it's okay to continue and process the order with the lines that are valid. So now let's add. Great. Finally, we should call do invoice, same as the manual mode. Okay, I think we're ready to try that out with the test file. And one last thing before we do the invoice, let's print out a message to show that the file went well, and we'll say loaded length of items selected. So let's go file mode and select test items. That's a long invoice. I really went ham, didn't I? Oh, whoops. That's very bad. I should have indented less. This is doing this on every single line of the file. That's quite wrong. Let's try that again. So now that it's not indented along with the for loop, it should only do an invoice once at the end, not every time it loads an item. Okay, so let's pick one for file mode and put in test items. Just one output. Seems great. So we open the file, we loaded 19 items, and here's that invoice. Excellent. Well, I hope this was a jolly little introduction to planning out and making a program from scratch. As always, if you have questions, send them my way, and I won't even charge you if I make it into a YouTube video. Have a great day, night, evening, whatever. Bye. And also maybe turn the text up. Maybe that's not the greatest abbreviation for bread. Let me back up a bit.